All right, so I am live on both YouTube and Twitch, and we'll see how this goes. Even though probably I did adjust the volume on. Let me adjust it a little bit more. Adjust my microphone. Adjust my microphone volume on my desktop audio. One of these days, I eventually want to be able to go live both on TikTok and YouTube at the same time. But figured just, open a casual chat, just start discussing. Mostly the chat, kind of open to discussions, but mostly going to focus around spirituality, New Age stuff. Because I think there is a fine distinction between what is New Age and what was done at one time, and some folks seem to be very interested in some of the New Age, what I call Reconstruction Revival movements. So if my fan is picking up on TikTok or even on YouTube, I apologize. Hopefully it's not too bad. But again, just kind of opening the chat, just have a open discussion about different paths and trying to not only find your path, but just kind of clarify and answer some questions from someone who at least has a perspective of looking at things for quite a few years. Austin Riley with the peace thing. Cool. It's not Bud. It's not what? It's not picking up on the fan? Cool. Good to know. Hopefully TikTok's the same. Hello. Welcome both Weaksider Refuge and Warlock Vex. And welcome Austin Riley and Remeron. Good to see you again. It's been a while since I've seen you. No fan? Cool. Like I said, hopefully the TikTok is the same way. Don't have a specific focus, although I could talk about the series that I've actually started here on TikTok, which I've actually called That's Not Viking, just to be comical. One of the things that I do like to do is I like to kind of dig into some of the older traditions and some of the misconceptions that folks have done with the revival reconstruction movement. Now, it's not bad to invent new things. However, I feel like it is misleading and lying when folks try to make claims that they're not backing up with historical evidence. If it's new, let folks know that it's new. There's nothing wrong with it being new. Now, specifically with some of the Viking stuff, and that's why I'm bringing this up right now, it's one of the most recent things that I've looked into and talked about. Some other traditions, like I was looking at some of the Slavic traditions, it is very hard to find information on a lot of these different traditions. So it's like, I feel like there's a double-edged sword here with the most recent interest in some of the Nordic, Scandinavian type of revival stuff, because it makes it more available. So for someone like myself, who is essentially, on my mom's side, first-generation American, it is cool because I can start seeing and researching what my ancestors might have done. I think that's awesome. But it's frustrating when you have to sort through stuff, I really feel like it's important to share resources and information. I think as a community and as a whole, folks can grow more when you direct them towards where you got that information from. So when I talk about stuff like when I point out Aegis Yalmer or Vegvasir or modern symbols, I want to point you to the references I'm using for that so that you yourself can go and say, okay, I can agree or disagree based on what you're saying, looking at your resources instead of just random person trying to tell you that's not a Viking Age symbol. Why? Let's talk about it. Let me show you the actual depiction of what folks use today for those symbols, what book you can find it historically in, and then if you have a counter to that, share that. I have no problem with being wrong, just share your resources. And yeah, that's my big thing, is resources. Back it up. And that's what I'm hoping to do here, is if folks ask questions, I will share what resources I have, and I'll point out, hey, this might be a good legit resource, or this might just be something that people say. One of the things I was working on earlier today, as I've been talking about for a while now on my YouTube channel, I want to do a video on tea. Tea is a common practice in many different kind of cultures and traditions, and it is a modern practice that there is at least some biological, scientific stuff you can back it up with, so it's not just spiritually based. Consuming herbs, you want to be careful. You want to know what herbs you're consuming. You want to know if you have allergies to them, and you don't want to just like give people the advice of, yeah, just go ahead and take this herb. Could have positive and negative effects. So again, having research. Now, when you're talking about just spiritual practice, what's the harm? Some people might argue, depending on their spirituality and faith, there's a harm in practicing this faith or spirituality, which is not true. I call bullshit there. The reason I call bullshit is I think at the end of the day, all spirituality is blind faith. I don't care what tradition you're coming from. At some point in time, you were told by someone, could be your culture, could be your parents, could be your family, could be your local community. Someone told you what spirituality was. They told you what was right or wrong. It doesn't matter what the practice is. Eventually, you get to the point where you're old enough and you're like, hey, I'm going to come up with my own ideas based upon those influences. That's why I think, my personal interpretation of this is, you see folks, welcome to the stream, by the way. You see folks, and they will practice very similar. One of the trends that I'm noticing is you have some of the New Age Reconstruction Revival movements, and a lot of them, and again, not criticizing, but a lot of them are basically practicing like monotheistic practices. It essentially looks like Christian practices with a different deity involved or a different symbol. But it's very, very, very close. I know I was looking up this one, again, because I'm interested in the Scandinavian stuff, just due to the fact of my heritage. My mom was born in Iceland, so I'm like, hey, okay, I want to know more about what my family might have done. There's not a lot of records, by the way, so it's hard to tell. But I saw a prison group that was doing a ceremony, and they had, I believe they had a Mjolnir hanging on the wall, and you had everyone wearing Mjolnir necklaces, which, okay, cool, no big deal. That's something that seemed to have been done. We had found a lot of archaeological finds about people wearing Mjolnir necklaces. We know it was a very important symbol. We don't necessarily know why they wore it, but we know it was an important symbol. And they had a wooden Mjolnir in their hand that they were holding up. And they were all around an altar. And literally, if you would have traded out the Mjolnir for like a crucifix or a cross, it would look like a Christian church. It was that close. So there's nothing wrong with that. But it just goes back to point something out that I personally feel, which is people don't give up their culture. When people do practices, they are going to go based upon what they're learning, what they're told, what their culture does, what their family does, what their town does, what their city does. And that is going to have a large influence on how they go about pursuing worship, practice. See, I teeter on the term worship versus practice just for the simple fact that it's like, not everybody considers it to be worship. Some people consider it to be more of a practice, especially in some of... So there's this book I've got. I remember his last name is like Dux or something. D-U-X. And it's called Living Asatru. Not Alsatru, Asatru. Specifically Asatru. Living Asatru, which is an Americanized version. And I remember reading in there distinctly that their particular viewpoint, and this was similar to some of the things that I'd heard online, is modern revival reconstructionists with some of the Scandinavian paths talk about working with the divine, the different tribes of deities, versus worshiping them. They honor them through deed and action. So again, it depends on who's doing it and how they want to pursue it. Now that is a little bit different, because I think from what I remember in a lot of the monotheistic Christian type of Abrahamic religions, there is more of a worship versus a working with. Again, nothing wrong with that. You find what path is going to work best for you and you go from there. So I'll ramble on. Feel free to jump in if there are questions or particular topics that you would like to discuss, and we can aim this at what the chat's interested in. Because if not, I'll just ramble, which I don't mind doing. I ramble a lot. Eventually, like I said, I'm trying to get TikTok to the point. Oh, hello there. Didn't notice that you were streaming. Hello, Sword Sister. All is well, I hope. Yeah, things are going fairly well, all things considered. My oldest dog is not doing too great. We might have to say goodbye to her soon. She is going on 17. She is ancient as far as dogs go, but that's probably the worst thing I'm dealing with right now. Everything else is going pretty well. How about yourself? Yeah, I didn't plan this live on TikTok or on YouTube. I just randomly threw it together and I need to start doing lives more. Sorry to hear that. No, thank you. Appreciate that. My condolences. Thank you, Voodoo. The dude. I appreciate that. Both of you. Sword Sister and Voodoo. Yeah, it's never easy because I've always looked at our pets as family. No difference. Humans are animals too. I know not everybody agrees with that, and that's fine. You don't have to agree with me. I'm just going to share my thoughts. That's kind of the whole point here. I probably should start scheduling these instead of just randomly going live, so people that want to attend have the ability to attend. Eventually, like I said, I'm trying to do both the TikTok platform as well as the YouTube platform because my main audience has always been here on YouTube. Now, I have neglected my YouTube channel, and I want to start doing more videos. TikTok has been convenient just for two facts. Number one, TikTok seems like it's quicker, shorter videos, so you can reach a larger audience. But then there's also the fact, too, that with YouTube, I feel like it's overpopulated almost, so it's real easy to get lost in the weeds. Now, I took about a 2-year break from my YouTube channel. I wasn't posting regularly for a while, and even now it's very sporadic when I post, like maybe once a month or every couple of months, and that has hurt my channel. My wife had started a channel about dogs, and it's going pretty well. But she posts 2 to 3 times a week, and she is regularly interacting with her community. When I first started YouTube, I didn't even know about the comment section, and I wasn't always getting notified on comments. So I was actually getting folks reaching out to me, and I was not responding because I wasn't aware that there was a comment section or that I was missing. So I'm trying to do more of an effort to do that. I'm also kind of becoming more jaded as I get older. There was a time period where I just got really frustrated and fed up, and I think that's the other reason I don't want to completely quit my YouTube channel at all. When I was younger, so I was born in 81, in the 90s, we didn't have a lot to go off of. We had Llewellyn publications, and I still have a ton of Llewellyn books. One of these days I will give a library tour. I know people have been asking for that for a while. And it's not that Llewellyn books are bad. It's just a lot of the stuff that's printed is not backed up by fact or historical evidence. So it's basically people putting their own personal twist and spin on a practice and just throwing it out there. And I have found that there's a lot of fluff that is added and bulked up into these new Reconstruction Revival movements, which again, there's nothing wrong with that. Just acknowledge it. If you can't trace it back somewhere, why are you sharing it with others? Why are you trying to tell others how to practice, how to worship, how to honor stuff when you yourself are just kind of inventing it on the spot? A lot of misassociation with things. I want to do a video in the future. So like I said, I'm working on my tea video first, probably do my axe video next, and then I'm going to follow that up with talking about the elements. So I talked a little bit about this in my last live where I was talking about a lot of the elements that folks are used to in modern new age stuff is like earth, air, fire, and water, and spirit. And we never really stop. Okay, when I say we, on a whole, it seems like most of the community doesn't stop and ask why. I'm happy to see you live. I have no Druidic connection online otherwise. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And you're always welcome. I am on YouTube as well, if you would like to search me on there also. And I do have a Discord, which is dead, but I do both. The Druidic Revival movement's another great one. That one has a very rich history and a lot of misconceptions in the Druidic movement. Modern Druid practices, you could either call them Druidry or you can call them Druidism. And depending on what you call them, varies. And each individual, it varies. But a lot of people have this misconception that, oh, the Druids connects back with the ancient Druids, and that's just not the case. Druidry and Druidism are both modern. There's nothing wrong with that, but we can trace it back about 300 years. Austin Riley said, you were speaking of Viking or Norse spirituality. I was curious if there has ever been any evidence of ancestor veneration or worship within that culture. From what I understand, and again, if I'm iffy on it and it's hearsay, I'm going to let you know. And this is one of those cases where it is mildly hearsay. Yes, as far as I know, there is some evidence of ancestor worship. And it's one of the schools of thought. So a lot of people that get into the Norse revival reconstruction stuff have a tendency to fall into one of two major camps, typically. You have individuals who feel like spirituality belongs to everyone, do whatever you want. A lot of people seem to favor that. there is a subset of individuals, and this is not unique to North Scandinavian traditions, and that's the thing that really pisses me off with it. People will get attacked for it, but they believe that if you do not have blood ties to the practice, you shouldn't be practicing it. Now, people act like it's just the North Scandinavian people, and people attack them and use the racist term left and right for saying that. But they never stop and say, well, what if an indigenous person, let's take someone who's Cherokee. Let's pretend you're talking to someone who's Cherokee and you want to mimic what they do and practice what they practice, and they say, you can't, you're not a Cherokee, you're not part of our tribe. Would you hold that to the same standard? Or let's say you take an Indian, you go to a Hindu church or temple. I don't know what a Hindu gathering is. And the Hindus tell you that you can't, they don't want you to practice because you're not Indian. You either are Hindu, you're born Hindu, or you're not. Or any practice from anywhere. Chinese practice, let's take Taoism. If you're not Chinese, you shouldn't practice Taoism. So if there's an individual from a culture and they try to tell you you shouldn't practice because it's not part of your culture, you should treat it all the same. So regardless, I'm personally of the thought that practice whatever you want, just show it respect and honor where it comes from. That's my personal viewpoint. But again, there tends to be two camps. The one camp that believes you should be of that heritage or culture in order to practice it, some of them do believe one of the reasons for them believing that concept is because the clans of the deities are in fact ancestors. The way that a lot of the different deities and some of the different cultures are written, it appears that they write them as if they're actual people. So take the three main clans that are considered deities within the North Scandinavian culture. Now, I'm saying three clans and I'm saying deities because people translate it to gods and goddesses. That's fine. Call them whatever you want. But there's three distinct ones: the Aesir, the Vanir, and the Jotnar. The Aesir are typically associated with higher plane stuff, things that are more ethereal, law-based. The Vanir are the tribe that's associated with the peoples, with the earth. So you're talking about like farming and land and stuff. And then you have the Jotnar, which are like basically the giants, and they're associated with chaos and destruction. So you have basically three different clans that are associated with different parts of the elements. However, they write about each of them as if they're actual people. The whole god of or goddess of is not a concept that you typically find in North Scandinavian writing. Typically, god of is usually associated with like Roman or Greek or some of the other cultures out there, but you don't hear that a lot in the Scandinavian practices. So if you look at stuff like Thor, some people will say he's the god of thunder, but you cannot, okay, I have not personally run across a writing that specifically calls Thor the god of thunder. Instead, it mentions about how Thor works with, or quite literally is, thunder. They call Thor the thunder god, but they don't say god of, and they don't necessarily, again, say that's something he controls so much as the word Thor itself almost translates into thunder itself, just like the word Odin will translate into the Mad One, because again, associated with madness and stuff. So in that aspect, you can think about them as being almost human-like in their traits and attributes. If you look at the Druid stuff, because Voodoo was talking about the Druid stuff, you hear about what they call the Tua De Danann. Some people pronounce it Tuatha, but it's the Tua De Danann. And they're talked about as the children of the goddess Danu. And it's a tribe. These deities were so important, they were looked at as like higher fae, that they actually kept them alive when Ireland and some of the other Celtic-speaking regions, because Celtic was a language group, that a lot of these regions turned them into saints. If you look at the Christian saints, not all of them have proof that they existed and lived, but they write about them in the same way that they wrote about some of the Tua De Danann. Brigid, which is one of the most important deities, in my opinion, with the Irish tradition, with Druidry and stuff, one of my personal favorites as well, she became Saint Bridget. And a lot of the different practices that were associated potentially with the goddess Brigid, and there are questions on where some of those traditions came from, including Minerva from the Greeks and Romans writing down some of the things from the region, that the practices seem very similar to the way modern neo-pagan revival reconstructionists will honor the goddess Brigid. It seems very similar to how they honor Saint Brigid. So it's interesting. I apologize, I know this is a long explanation, Austin, but I hope you're enjoying it. So when you look at the Norse Scandinavian tribes and stuff like that, and you look at how they're basically written like they're actual people, you have stories about them almost becoming mortal-like. The apples of Idun were supposed to be, as I understand it, they're golden apples, and they kept the Aesir and Vanir young. Well, one thing ended up happening, and I forget the exact reasons around the whole story, but basically Loki kidnapped Idun and her apples and brought them to one of the Jotnar. And the Jotnar had possession of Idun for a while, and all of the Aesir started getting old and gray, and they were worried that if they didn't find Idun soon, they would die, because it was actually these immortal apples keeping them young. Now, granted, this is a saga or an Edda. Yeah, it's one of the stories. So we don't know if it was necessarily supposed to reflect their actual religious belief, or it had to do with just a story that you write about. But you have a lot of different stories that writes about them from a human perspective. You know, Thor gets angry, or he was challenged by the Jotnar to all of these different trials, and it ends up showing how Thor is slightly dim-witted. So he's strong, he's brave, but he's slightly dim-witted. So taking these different aspects and stuff and showing them in this human perspective, to me, I think suggests that they did potentially honor them as ancestors, that they were descended from them, that they were born and we were born of them. So that type of stuff makes me want to answer your question very long-windedly. Yes, I think that there is enough evidence there to suggest that is a distinct possibility. Doesn't mean it was, but I think there's evidence there. And a lot of modern writers do write about the different tribes, the Norse Scandinavian tribes, Aesir, Jotnar, and Vanir, as being potentially people who lived that became deified. You even see this in some of the Chinese culture stuff. Like, apparently Guan Yun, General Guan, where we get the Guandao from, which is like a sword on a stick, he apparently was deified. So he was an actual living person, but they consider him to be one of the deities in some of their cultural traditions, supposedly, if I understand it correctly. So yeah, I think so. I think one of the most interesting stories in the Tua De Danann is the Dagda. I can see that. Voodoo the Dude on TikTok was commenting that. Yeah, the general consensus, I think, on a whole, of how the different tribes worked inside of the Celtic speaking regions. And again, see, so when you say the word Celtic, and if you look up the regions, and I did a video on this once, it shows the map of the Celtic languages. We're talking about all over France, Ireland, Britain, all the way over to the east. I mean, it was a pretty large and substantial reason, apparently Sully wants to participate in the conversation, that were Celtic speaking regions. And some of the stories that I've seen are specific with Ireland. Like, they talk about the Fomorians basically living there in Ireland, and then the Tua De Danann came there. We don't know where they came from, but they talk about, like, some of the parents, the Dagda, and there's a main god and goddess, and I can't recall, I would actually have to look it up, that basically came to Ireland and defeated the Fomorians and then took it over. And then there's even talk about, apparently, the Irish came in after them and either defeated them, and they went underground into the fairy mounds. So then there's a suggestion maybe they lived and were killed and they became higher fae in the other realm, and the fairy mounds was their way of returning to the earth and still interacting with us. So there's like different aspects of possibility with it as well. Nuada, that sounds about right. I know there was a main deity. There was the Dagda, I believe, which was the god, and there was a female counterpart to that. Might have been Danu. Might have been Dagda and Danu, possibly. But again, I don't have it memorized, so that's something I would have to look up. The Druid stuff and some of those traditions is one of those things, like, I have pieces here and there, and I have the occasional story. I would almost say it's similar to some of the Nordic Scandinavian stuff I've looked at. I have the occasional story, but then I have to find out where it came from. And when it comes to the Druid stuff, I'm really interested in the Irish traditions because it's part of my own heritage. But a lot of this stuff seems to be written down in Wales, so most of it is Welsh stuff. Like even when you talk about Ceridwen and Ceridwen's cauldron, and talking about Taliesin and how he was originally Gwion Bach, and how he sucked his thumb with the drops of Awen, the 3 drops of Awen that hit, and gave him this universal awareness and intelligence that was supposed to go to Ceridwen's son. And so she goes after him, and they do the shape shifting, and she eventually eats him. And then he gets reborn as Taliesin, and he becomes the greatest bard in Druid history. But that's a Welsh tale, so it's like finding and picking through some of the pieces is sometimes difficult. So I don't know a ton about the Dagda. I just remember hearing the name, and I know the Dagda was one of the main deities associated with the Tuatha Dé Danann. Dagda was the chief, as I understand it. He had a famous affair with Nuada's wife, the river goddess. Don't remember her name. Yeah, like I said, I would have to look it up in order to have something to reference. But Austin, did that answer your question? So I always like to keep notes. So I've got a Celtic Irish section here. And I think, let's see, Tuatha Dé Danann. What did I write down dealing with the Tuatha Dé Danann? Let's see, I mentioned how to say their name. Oh, there's another name for the Tuatha Dé Danann. So Tuatha Dé Danann basically means the children of the goddess Danu. But there's also Aesdana, another name for the Tuatha Dé Danann, meaning skilled people. Ondagda was the god, and I don't. Danu, yeah, Danu would have been the main goddess, as I understand it, based upon my notes as well. And again, you know, if you have more information, we can definitely discuss it. But that's as far as I know. So it looks like in some of the Celtic mythologies, there's over 374 deities. That's one of the problems, of course, with memorizing them all, which is why I've kind of picked and choose some of them. Yes, thank you. Please, long-winded answers are the best answers. Cool. Yeah, by all means, like I said, and I welcome questions from anyone in the chat. This is just supposed to be an open conversation, just to kind of share ideas with each other. Yeah, I've got quite a few written down. Yeah, I was trying to look into, like, I've got a list of books that I wanted to start getting into with some of the revival stuff. So a lot of my introduction to some of the Druidic stuff has been through OBOD, Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. I joined their online course class for Bard like 13, 14 years ago. I haven't gone through it all because I jump around so much in my studies. But that's where most of my stuff comes from. But I started combining a reading list of different things I want to read, like the Annuals of the Four Masters. And I would butcher the pronunciation, but it looks like it's pronounced Anala Ricocha Arian, apparently. And that's one of the books that I wanted to look into. There's Henry Hurley. There's also, I have got his book over here. Where is it at? Blood and Mistletoe by Ronald Hutton. Ronald Hutton is one of the foremost authorities when it comes to some of the potential Celtic Druid practices. Do you know anything about vibrating words by chance? My books are iffy on the execution. I don't know how, but I have heard of the practice. Yeah, there's a lot of different vocalization techniques, but I think most of them, especially with some of the Druid stuff, is more modern. I would suggest checking out the 21 Lessons of Merlin. I'm working through that one currently. I have actually read the 21 Lessons of Merlin. I've actually got it over here on my shelf, and it's actually pretty good. The biggest problem I have with it is it's theory-based. So Merlin himself may have been based upon a couple different druids, including Merthin Emrys, I think is the main druid, and Cathbad. And it goes through Arthur's training as if he was trained and raised as a druid, which I find very fascinating. I don't know if you've gotten to the part where they have a scythe, hand sickle, and they have a orb of light that they're sending back and forth, and they keep going back and forth until they're almost face to face and it goes flying off in the air, and then they're reaching out in the dark. It's a very interesting story, but I take it I don't think it actually came from any traditional old story. I think it's a modern adaptation, which is kind of one of the problems that I have when I read a lot of the different stuff, is how authentic and how true is the things that's coming out. Like there's also one that's called Druid Magic by Maya There's 2 different writers in it. There's 21 Lessons of Merlin right there. Where's Druid Magic? I think it's Nicholas R. Mann and Maya Sutton. But Maya Sutton calls herself a PhD. And she calls herself a PhD, which bothers me because it's not a doctorate degree that she has. She is saying PhD is in practicing holistic druid. And again, I feel like that's kind of misleading. And she takes a couple of the stories that she liked to kind of put those together. I have that one as well, but haven't cracked it. I mean, it's a good read. I like Mann's writing style better than Maya's writing style. And again, I kind of have a personal pet peeve against someone claiming a PhD when in fact they're just saying they're practicing holistic druid. And you can be one too just by calling yourself that. And I'm just like, I feel like a lot of the spiritual terms have lost all meaning whatsoever. Like, there was a huge boom, especially in the 90s, for people calling themselves witches. And I'm sure you know, or you may be one of them, one of you watching it may call yourself a witch. So on the possibility of causing conflict, I'm going to say something, but I'm going to preface it with saying, again, this is my opinion, and you can feel about it how you want to feel about it. But what makes you a witch? What is witchcraft? Those 2 items usually can't be answered. I'll help you out a little bit. So to begin with, witch no longer has a meaning. It's used generically. You might as well call yourself a magician at this point. It is literally someone who works with magic. Same with the term warlock. Yes, it is the same with the term warlock. Practice. Thank you, Sword Sister. And I'm not telling people not to call themselves a witch. I'm not saying that. I'm also not insulting the people that practice what they consider to be witchcraft. So here's the thing. Witchcraft and witch seemingly has been used as a very generic term for magic and magician. Magician is somebody who practices magic. Yes, most people associate it with stage magic when you hear the word magician, but that's what magician means. It's someone who does magic. That's why stage magicians call themselves magicians, because they're selling it as being actual magical power. Now, here's the thing. I also do stage illusions and tricks and magic, and I do consider it to be real magic because you are quite literally weaving a spell of illusion, allowing your audience to believe in the impossible through word and action. So it is a type of real magic. Is the effects they're doing real magic? Of course not. But the essence of what they're doing through entertainment, I would classify as real magic. Well, magic is magic. Right, exactly. And I think that's kind of the point. So why call yourself a witch? Why call yourself a druid? Why call yourself any of the individual names? It seems to me that people have started just calling themselves something to announce to the world that they are associated with a particular type of practice or are inspired by a particular type of research. So when you hear the term witch, you usually think of an individual who is associated with either A, that's just magic period because they don't know what else to call themselves, B, British traditions, because that's actually where the word comes from. It comes from an Anglo-Saxon word, or C, it's someone who specifically works with divine elemental mysticism. A lot of people who call themselves a witch will consider and associate with elemental mysticism, which is interesting, which is why I'm going to do a video in the future about the different 5 elements, because apparently that comes directly from Hinduism. There's actually Franz, I mentioned it last time, I'd have to pull it up again, but it is a book that actually lists all the 5 elements out. They're called Titwas, T-I-T-W-A-S, Titwas. And you can look them up, and it shows the actual Hindu name for it. And, of course, the Hindu name for spirit is Akasha, which back in the 90s, everybody was saying earth, air, fire, water, and Akasha, or spirit. A lot of people use the word Akasha because that's where it comes from. Can you show me an association with it from some other practice? The term warlock, I do have a video on this, but you can actually also trace that back to Anglo-Saxon words as well as Nordic Scandinavian words, and it essentially means oathbreaker, liar, or traitor. That is the actual root word of the meaning of it. However, you can trace it a little bit further, and you can look up and see that it was actually used in Scotland to refer to as male witch, but that came after the original word. Etymology.com is going to be your friend. Etymology.com. So on etymology.com, look up any word you want and look up the root word, and then try to do research when you're looking online. Search for where it originally was used. Hey, Leichner, good to see you, man. Welcome. Are you human? Yeah, I'm human. Why is it taking me? Ugh, trying to find etymology. I don't know why it's sending me somewhere else. So there is an etymologyonline.com. And if we look up, for example, the word warlock, let's start there because I'll tell you about witch in a second here. Old English, and I don't speak Old English, werloga, traitor, liar, enemy, devil. From the word wer, which means faith, fidelity, or compact, from the Proto-Germanic, potentially, vera, or wera, and which basically means truth or vow. So again, and the Ligonen, even in the German, Norse type of High German, it would mean lie. So a vow, lie. So again, liar, traitor. But you can find that with those old root words, but then you can take it into... So original primary sense seems to have meant oathbreaker, given special application to the devil because there were warlocks of the church and the Christian church, which considered warlocks that were basically devil worshippers. So probably a negative innuendo there. The 13th century, however, and apparently ending it with a CK, which started in 1680, was the male equivalent to a witch. This was popularized in 1560 in Scotland. So again, you can find and trace this stuff online. We have so many tools at our fingertips right now. The Dusty Dud, glad I caught a live finally. Me too. I need to start announcing them, not just jumping live. Hello, just found your channel probably a month ago. I like your videos and take on things. Thank you. And welcome to the live. I try to interact with the chat as much as possible. Feel free to ask questions, and we can definitely direct the conversation on what you're most interested in. If you combine Eastern practices and Western ones, you'll often notice that the energy works the same, Sword Sister said. I agree with it. I agree with you very much. And that's why usually I will refer to most spiritualities as being the exact same. It is just different takes on the way that you go about interacting with the divine. That's just my opinion, but that's how I feel about it. It's awesome how you use that green screen. Thanks, Benson. I assume you're trolling. So on my YouTube right now, it has actually been turned into a tree, even though there's light that's kind of blocking it out. I forgot to click on my green screen effect before I went live on TikTok. Usually I have it turned into something in the background, but I don't even know if I can pop that on now or not. I don't know if I can add effects afterwards. I don't think I can. Let's see. No, I needed to set that up at the beginning, I think. So yeah, unfortunately, you get to stare at a ruddy green screen in the background. Sorry about that. It happens. Etymology or root stems can be very helpful generally. I agree. I like to look up because again, it's language, it's words, right? But going back to what I was originally saying, when people use a word, it's usually to try to associate it with something. And witchcraft and witches are associated with Anglo-Saxon traditions. So you're talking about Britain. So if you're doing British traditions, maybe that would make sense for you. If you're doing Irish traditions, maybe you would use the term druid, which, by the way, interestingly enough, the term druid is actually a modern term. It's not what they referred to themselves back in the ancient times, but we don't know a lot about what they used to do in the ancient times. Modern practices, both Druidry and Druidism, are roughly about 300 years old, which we can dig into more if you're interested in. Same thing when you start hearing people calling themselves a Norse pagan, which seems to be very popular, or heathen. You were talking about the Scandinavian revival reconstruction stuff. So it makes sense to call yourself something based upon the traditions you're trying to follow or adapt to. However, I throw up the argument there that if you are going to claim it, then it again loses meaning. You can't try to gatekeep it from others using it. And it also doesn't have much meaning if anybody can just call themselves that. So if you start practicing one day and say I'm a witch, or you start practicing one day I'm a druid, I'm a Norse pagan, it's then meaningless. It's literally just saying that I'm studying this versus I achieved something. But it's spirituality. What have you really achieved? So unless you're part of a group or a community, there's not really a rank associated with it. It's just a label that you're slapping on yourself because of an interest. Gotta run, but it was nice conversing. I'll definitely be back next time. Yeah, absolutely, Voodoo the Dude. Thanks for hanging out. You have a great one. Your commentary is so amazing. You don't need a cool background, so get attention. Benson, I hope you're being legit there with your comments, but even if you're not, thank you for sharing your thoughts regardless. But yeah, eventually I had it up last time. I just forgot this time, but I'm trying to dual live here, so I have two chats to go off of. I know that on my TikTok, sometimes it takes a while for the lives to kick off. It's kind of hit and miss. YouTube, once I get started, usually folks jump in pretty good. And I try to keep my lives under an hour. Oh my goodness, I've been live for 39 minutes. I ramble too much, I really do. But I enjoy rambling, so like I said, keep the questions coming, keep the comments coming. Good or bad, we'll take them all. But yeah, and again, like I said, I'm not trying to criticize or tell people what they can and cannot call themselves. It's just having a little context of where things came from, I feel like can be helpful when making a decision. Because at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what you call yourself. Do you see deities as little? I just found Wicca and paganism, but I like science and always feel skeptical, or like I doubt all the time. Do you ever feel that way? Oh, on a regular basis, honestly. So the Dusty Dud on YouTube was asking that question, and I think at the end of the day, I bounce through different traditions. So typically, some people will be drawn to a particular path, either because it's part of their own heritage, or it's just something cool that drew their attention. So with either one of those cases, some people will spiral down a specific path, or they might switch every so often. I personally have found that in today's information age, everything being accessible at your fingertips, there's a lot of different resources to pour through, whether it be personal experience or people writing stuff or sharing videos. And a lot of it seems very similar. And we were just talking about this earlier. I think Sword Sister mentioned that. Yeah, Sword Sister mentioned that just a little bit earlier. So I personally find, in my personal opinion, this is my opinion, again, this is not substantiated by anything other than me just feeling this way. I feel like there's divinity. You can call that any name you want. You can call it the gods, the goddesses, a specific god. You can call it the universe. You can call it the Great Spirit. It could literally be anything that you want, because as humans, we do not understand what this divinity is. So personally, I feel like there's this divinity. Our ability to interact with that divinity has to do with our perception. How do we perceive and view it? Some people might view it as elemental forces raw in nature. Some people might view it as a specific being. With that in mind, when you are talking about faith and belief and spirituality, there is nothing to prove it's true. As somebody who practices illusions and tricks, I know very well the mind can be tricked into believing something that's not necessarily factual. So believing your senses can be misleading. At the end of the day, though, it comes down to personal choice. It's blind faith. So do I feel like the deities are real beings? Yes and no. I feel like the deities that are prescribed in different faiths, regardless of what faith it is different ways of trying to interpret that divinity. That's my personal view. Having doubt, I think you see that in any spirituality you go to. Every spiritual person I've ever spoken with has admitted or is trying to hide the fact that they've experienced doubt at one point or another. At the end of the day, I would advise you trust your personal instincts. Listen to that inner voice. If it feels right, go for it. As long as you're not harming anyone, just follow your own instincts. That's my advice. But yeah, I think having doubt, I think, makes a lot of sense. Because at the same time, when you're getting into stuff like paganism, New Age, Reconstruction, Revival stuff, even if you look at stuff that has a history, if you look at Christianity or Hinduism, Buddhism, any of the different practices that have been around for thousands of years, it is still some human's interpretation of divinity. They are putting it into human words and human lessons to try to guide you along a spiritual path. The age of a path, in my opinion, does not make it more or less valid. What makes it valid is what it does for you in your life and your journey. So if you are finding what you are seeking and it feels right inside, I'd say continue with it. Like I said, with the caveat is as long as you're not harming anyone. Just speaking with spirit. To me, I personally view it that way. Not everyone's going to agree with that. In fact, I know some individuals that think it's very wrong to walk any path but their own religious path that they're on, and anyone who walks a different path is going to suffer in the afterlife. Some people genuinely believe that. I do not. I'm not one of those people. I think that as humans, we should constantly question and be seekers and go off of what feels right. A lot of the paganism and neo-pagan stuff, though, like I said, it is interpretations of the past. So when you hear a deity's name, you are talking about deities that were honored hundreds of years ago. In many cases, there's no actual factual record of how they practiced. It's secondhand accounts or hearsay after the fact. So it is very possible it feels weird because maybe you're not using the same name of whatever that being is. But then this asks the question, how do they get the name to begin with? How do they know that that energy or that being had that name or label? That's something some human at some point came up with, and everyone decided to agree to that name and start using. We don't know. And because there's not a lot of records for what was, it's really hard to trace any of that back. It's all theory. Hopefully that helps. What did we see down here? I tried a live earlier and got nothing. Oh, you mean as far as people interacting, like near? Yeah, I'm facing that a lot on TikTok. Today, I was actually surprised. I have 90 likes. By the way, on TikTok, if you tap the screen rapidly, it gives me likes and it costs you nothing. That tells TikTok you like my stuff. Hint, hint. But earlier, I had like 60 people jump in. And I'm like, whoa, I've got an actual live going. And then they slowly disappeared. Now there's 3. It happens. But if you go live and I see you, I will try to join. Thank you for those likes, by the way. I appreciate that. Maybe you should master solo live before you tackle duo live. We are animals. Get over yourself. So lies are okay to you. Feelings are better than truth. Brutal, Benson. You know, you don't have to agree with me. And I'm fine with you sharing your thoughts. So far, you're not being a complete douche. Kind of being a jerk, but fine, whatever. Feelings better than truth. Let's talk about that. At the end of the day, when it comes to spirituality, there is no truth. There's no way to prove spirituality. It is something you feel and experience. That is why some people are not spiritual at all, because there's nothing in our modern science to back up what they believe to be true. All faith is that way. It is all blind faith. It is believing because it feels right. So yes, I would absolutely say that feelings are important. Better than truth? No, I think they're two completely separate things. And in fact, it's the truth piece that nags at me on a regular basis, which is why when I look into spirituality, I try to find historically accurate stuff or sources to build off of as inspiration, because there's no point in trying to reinvent the wheel. If somebody had done something before, they might be able to give you some advice on your spiritual journey. So I look to those people. I look to those writings. I look to those practices, whether it be carvings or archaeology or just words written in a book. That can be inspirational for individuals, and I think you can find something out of it. Because at the end of the day, what are you looking for when you're trying to find spirituality? You're trying to find some sort of a connection to something greater than yourself, something beyond who you are. Keep looking. Well, there's no reason to be a jerk about it. Like I said, everyone is looking, and if someone finds something, then that's good enough for them. It's not on you to judge others and tell them what's right or wrong for themselves. You can, but I'm going to ignore you. I really don't care. Have you found anything yet? I found a lot of things. And the more I find on different religions and spiritual paths, the more I realize that my path is going to be my own. I don't want to associate with one specific path, because all of these different paths that I've looked into have some form of wisdom to share. So I am not going to call myself by one name or one thing. I'm just going to walk my own personal path, make it my own. And as I discover new things or consider new things, my path will evolve and adapt as I personally see fit. But again, that's my own personal journey. That's my personal experience. I agree. I choose Norse, but in my opinion, the Norse gods are a merging of animism and ancestor veneration. Ah, you hear that? So it's interesting you bring that up, like near. I got excited because there was actually someone earlier, I think Austin mentioned it. Yeah, so Austin Riley on YouTube mentioned you were speaking of Vikings or Norse spirituality. I was curious if there has ever been any evidence of ancestor veneration or worship within that culture. And I was mentioning that, yeah, I've actually known individuals like yourself who do consider it a form of ancestor worship. So, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I could see animism and ancestor veneration being closely associated with the Scandinavian paths. That makes a lot of sense to me. So, like Near, by the way, if you get on TikTok, talks about a lot of this stuff too, and he's got a great channel, some really great videos to check out. Ramron says, quotes Bruce Lee slightly there. Which one? Probably, but Bruce Lee is a huge inspiration for me. Definitely one of my modern day heroes. So it would make sense that I would say a quote very similar to something he might have said. He actually studied philosophy back in college. That was what he got a major in, is philosophy. As I understand it, I think it was philosophy. Pretty sure it was. Could be wrong there. I think it was. Snorri felt that way most likely. Right. Many ways, many paths. Yes. And what did Bruce do? Bruce basically created his own system, and instead of just doing movements and forms that are repetitious that were taught by other individuals, he instead taught himself how to fight. And when he taught others how to fight, he didn't teach you his system. He taught you how to find your own system, how to bring out the best movements that your body's capable of doing. And I take a very similar approach to spirituality with that. Simplification, down to the root of what it is. No longer matters what other people are doing. What are you doing? Focus on what you're capable of and your interaction, your experience. His martial art was about honestly expressing yourself. You totally remind me of Bruce Lee, spiritually. Thank you. I actually consider that to be a positive compliment. I hope you meant it that way, but even if you didn't, I'm taking it as a compliment anyway, because like I said, Bruce Lee, I'm a huge fan of him. Really like a lot of his writings and teachings. So. But yeah, back to the Dusty Duds point on the spirituality and the skepticism. Embrace it. Ask yourself why you're skeptic. What is it that you're seeking and looking for, and what feels right? I tend to find my way back to my own personal path, because anytime I veer too far from it, when it feels uncomfortable or awkward, I veer back to what I am comfortable with. But like I said, I mean, a lot of that has to do with how you're raised. You know, we're introduced to the world of spirituality from whoever raised us, and then the culture and society we grew up in. That's a huge influence. I actually 100% believe that modern practices are learned and adapted by watching culture. When you look at Christianity, which is one of the more popular religions in the world, it is mildly different based upon the tradition you go to. And I believe that's the case because people don't stop doing what they're doing. When you convert a country, I guarantee most of them are going to continue to do the practices they've always done and just say, okay, it's Christianity now. You see it all the time. Have there ever been, this is Austin, have there ever been any musical instruments found in Norse archaeology indicating ceremonial music? I believe there was, and I'm trying to remember. I'll have to look it up to find references, but yes, I believe they have found some musical instruments. I thought drum, and I thought some sort of a flute. Let me go and verify that before moving forward with it. There are some writings. So one of the favorite people that I like watching on YouTube is Eretherger, and I've referenced his stuff on a regular basis. He talks about seither. Now, seither is essentially a female practice in North Scandinavian traditions. Again, this is what I'm talking about, people reviving stuff and not using it right. A lot of people today try to say seither for magic, period. I don't agree with that. If I was going to call Norse spirituality, if I was going to say something was magic at all, I would say fjolkingi would be the more umbrella term for magic. Seither, I believe, to be a very specific practice. And Eretherger, in his video, and he gives references to it, talks about seither being a practice done by women that involved singing and musical performance with assistant women who would dance during it. So there was a huge ceremony with dancing and music involved. Now, if it was just verbal and just vocal, or if instruments were involved, I can't remember, and that's why I said I have to look it up. So I don't know for sure, so don't quote me on saying that there was musical stuff associated with their ceremonies, but I believe they had found drums, but I need to confirm that. Maria Kvilhog views Thor as the electromagnetic field of the earth, protective, etc. How many birds do you own? I own 4. So I have a crimson-bellied conure, I have a cockatiel, and I have 2 budgerigars. And the crimson-bellied conure screams constantly. The door is closed. I guess you're hearing it through the door. And actually, that makes a lot of sense to me. Like near, so earlier on the live, one of the things that I was talking about was the fact that there's the 3 main tribes of deities in the North Scandinavian traditions. You have the Aesir, the Vanir, and the Jotnar. and each of them seem to be associated with raw and elemental powers of existence. So the Aesir are kind of like your sky gods, your law, your order type stuff. Vanir are the deities of the people, of the earth, of the land, and the Jotnar are the forces of chaos and destruction. And Thor, apparently the name is very closely related to the Old Norse word for thunder. And in some readings I've read, he apparently is literally thunder. He is the personification of thunder. And I was mentioning that the whole god of is not really a concept I see in North Scandinavian studies. In fact, it seems closer related to Roman or Greek stuff when you say god of something. Whereas Thor might have been the thunder god, it's usually associated with him or being him. Like Odin is the mad one. He's literally madness personified. So it makes sense. I've read other stuff like that before, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You're pretty good at continually talking. Yes. For better or worse, I have diarrhea of the mouth. I just literally just constantly stream of words. I just like hearing myself speak, apparently. So I guess it makes sense for me to do videos and lives and streams because I just like talking. But I like sharing. I like learning and I like teaching. So, and I like sharing my opinion because some of the stuff that I'm saying is 100% opinion based. And I'm trying to let you know the difference between the two. If I can't give you a source or a reference, I will let you know. There's no point in sharing misinformation, in my opinion. It also makes me wonder sometimes when people do share information and they don't say where the source is or where it came from, what's the point? If you're not trying to help others learn from where you learned from, what are you afraid of? Is it because you want to hold that information and knowledge over them and lord it over them like, ha ha, I know something you don't? Or is it because you doubt the source itself? If you're not willing to put the source up for analysis and criticism, why are you sharing that information? Why are you repeating it? The Dusty Dud. Glad you like talking because I like listening. Well, thank you. Yeah, I do. I just like talking. I really do. I prefer it to be a conversation like this, and that's one of the other reasons, Benson, that I'm doing a live on TikTok and on YouTube. Twofold. One, I have a different audience on TikTok than I have on YouTube, and two, it allows me to reach more people. So if I do have a dead period in TikTok chats, I can go to the YouTube comments. If I have a dead period in the YouTube comments, I can go to the TikTok chat. So, true, I try to source all my stuff. Right. And like I said, like near, I have no problem whatsoever with anyone coming up with their own stuff. But once you start sharing it, let folks know that you've created that and invented that. This is how we got stuff like the Four Noble Truths, or I'm sorry, the Four Noble Virtues, the eightfold. Thinking about Buddhism, the Nine Noble Virtues from modern Reconstruction is made up and invented. I don't think there's any historical accuracy to that whatsoever. The Hammer Test, 100% modern stuff. So if you're going to make it up and you're going to make it new, tell people that so they can decide if they want to buy into that or not. But trying to sell it out there like that's what you have to do if you want to practice this drives me nuts. And actually, like Near is the individual. So earlier on my live here, I was talking about the fact that I've noticed that people adapt things culturally, but they keep with their own practices. I mentioned this was one way that you can research what folks might have done. Look at the cultures from where that practice comes from. If you're looking at North Scandinavian stuff, look at Denmark, Norway, Sweden. Look at what they do, and you'll see in some of their cultural practices what may have been. Same thing if you're looking at Slavic traditions. Look at Poland, look at Czechoslovakia, look at Russia, look at some of their traditions. If you're looking for Druid stuff, look at Ireland, look at France, look at Britain, look at some of the things that they might have done. Culturally, that might seem old or out of place for Christianity, or might, if you change the names, might fit differently. And I was mentioning earlier about how there was a prison group that I saw a photo of that were doing modern Norse Reconstruction stuff. They had Mjolnir up on the wall. They each had a necklace of Mjolnir, and the lead person in front of everyone, was holding Mjolnir in his hand. And if you literally changed every Mjolnir to a cross, it would have felt like a Christian church, which is fine. But a lot of people do that. They take what they know spirituality to mean or what they believe it to be, and then they layer on other practices. And Leiknir actually mentioned in one of his videos that when he was researching stuff back in the day, he kind of considers a lot of the modern stuff, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you referred to it as basically Norse Wicca. So basically, they're trying to do Wicca. And it's like, true, I try to source all my stuff. Yeah, the NNV are from Odenic Rite, AFA, 1980s. Right. Like, even their stuff, like the... And I'm very specific on the pronunciation. And Spawn Media, welcome. I forgot to sub to you. Glad I caught your live. I enjoy your videos. Well, thank you, Spawn. I appreciate that. And welcome to the live. There's a difference between Icelandic Ausatru and North American Asatru. And Asatru in North America, you have different groups, which they sometimes refer to themselves as Hoffs. So they'll practice differently. They're not all the same. AFA is one of those. AFA tried to claim that they came up with the name Asatru. No, they didn't. It's an Icelandic word. The Aesir, the Auses, literally Ausatru is Icelandic for faith in the Aesir. How do you come up with that as a modern thing if you're not... You're using Icelandic there, even if you're not pronouncing it right. That's why I say Asatru and Ausatru. There's two different practices. Ausatru Felagith, the revival movement in Iceland, is not the same as the AFA or any of the North American Asatru groups. And the North American Asatru groups, I've seen this before. I've talked to some of them. They celebrate some of the stuff of the Wheel of the Year from some of the Irish Celtic revival stuff. How are you going to do Imbolc, which is an Irish holiday, and say that you're doing North Scandinavian practices? Now, technically, Dublin is a Viking settlement, so there probably was some crossover. And I have Adam of Bremen, and there's some other sources as well that specifically were writing about how the Vikings worshipped in groves of trees, and then the Druids apparently worshipped in groves of trees. So there's some similarities between the practices. But I'm sorry, you're taking straight up the reconstructed Celtic Wheel of the Year, and you apply it to North Scandinavian traditions. Now you're merging traditions. You can't tell me that that's how everyone needs to practice if you're mixing in other traditions that are clearly not from a Scandinavian standpoint. I'm sorry, but it just doesn't make sense to me personally. You can do it, just don't claim it's something it's not. But that's why I kind of like Leiknir, very different indeed than the Ausatru Felagith. Yes, the AFA practices are a mix of Alexandria Wicca and copies of Catholic rituals. Okay, so it was Leiknir that mentioned it. I could have sworn one of your lives mentioned it, and I reference that a lot because not only do I trust your opinion, but I've had similar thoughts. And when you worded it that way, I'm like, you know, it's actually a really good point. That's a really good point, a really interesting way of thinking about it. The Dusty Dud said, do you think that there was just one god and goddess before there were many pantheons, gods, and goddesses? So I've debated this, and I would say no. I think that there is something beyond, and this is personal thoughts. This is not fact. My personal perception is, I think that there is a divinity beyond our comprehension completely. I personally believe it's part of everything. I think that's why we're literally alive and aware. That spark of divinity inside of us is part of whatever this is. However existence exists, it's because of divinity. I personally feel that the gods and goddesses is our way as a humankind to attempt to interact with the divine. That's what I believe. So just like when you go outside and you say that's a tree, that's an oak tree. Okay, what makes that an oak tree? Is there not a connection between that tree and the rest of the earth? Is there a separation between you and that tree? In a certain point of view, yeah, of course there is a difference. There's a biological separation there. But we literally have molecules in the air literally touching each other right now. We have a symbiotic relationship with it, breathing in, breathing out from both of us. When we die, if we died near its roots, it would absorb our nutrients from our decaying body. There is a connection and a symbiosis with all things. And we try to rationalize it with modern science, but I really do believe it's beyond our comprehension. So just like we call that an oak tree, and we have certain ways of working with wood, which is one aspect of existence, I think there's the same thing on the divine and spiritual level. But again, this is my personal perception, and I might change my mind a month or 2 months from now, a year from now. This is just how I view it today in this exact moment. That is how I see divinity as well. Hey, Sor Lisbeth, welcome to the stream. I think I see where you're coming from when you say part of a whole thing. I still cannot decide between pantheism and pantheism. I think I know what pantheism is, but I'm not sure about the pantheism one. I'm going to look that up because, again, if I don't know, I don't know. So I'm looking it up right now. So pantheism, all in. Oh, okay. I see. Yeah, I would almost say that I have a mesh of different views that would fit into a monistic, animistic, monistic and animistic and pantheistic, polytheistic. Probably those four things. I think I wrote it down once before of like the different kind of viewpoints I have. Yeah, I would say an eclectic, animistic, monistic, polytheistic viewpoint. Kind of a blend of those, but I don't like labels or terms, and it's so fluid how I think about things. That's why I don't really like names or titles, because it's just kind of, do your own thing, follow your own path. It's spirituality. We're never going to know for sure. Just don't harm anyone. Don't harm yourself. Don't harm other people. Don't harm other living creatures. But if you want to rationalize and theorize and read and study and honor and pray, do it on your own terms. That's my advice. Very different indeed than the esoteric. Okay, I read that. Cool. And welcome to the stream. Hello, everyone. Is that Hail Satan from MFF? You have a very similar name to an MFF user. Personal opinion, I don't believe there is any belief system that is truly monotheistic, even in the 3 Abrahamic religions that claim to be monotheistic. They also acknowledge the existence of angels. That's actually a very good point, Spawn. I am also very animistic in my worldview. I like the divinity concept, also kind of like the Great Spirit view. Right. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's just, I feel like it's finding what feels right. So if you do find a deity in a particular culture, a name for it, does the name feel right when you speak it? Do you feel like you have that comfort, that answer, that connection? I personally think that makes the most sense to me. And it's like, when you do pick one that you associate with, even if you don't fully understand what it might have been, since we're talking about the North Scandinavian stuff right now, let's say, for example, the name Thor, or you can say Thor. I speak a little Icelandic, so I'm trying to use Icelandic pronunciations, as butchered as they are. If Thor feels right to you and you feel protected and honored by thinking of his name and thinking of an interaction with him, then go for it. But what aspects are you trying to tap into of divinity? Are you trying to get that protector? Do you want to have that protection? Do you want to find that empowerment within yourself? Do you want to find that explosive thunder to awaken your inner strength? Then okay, go for it. And it makes sense to you. It can be a private thing. You don't need to share it with the world. Who cares what other people think of you or call you? At this point, I'm ready to just start calling myself a wizard. Because a wizard is basically associated with fantasy and fiction. And I think it was, let's get etymology.com. I think it was the 15th century when they first started using the word wizard, and it basically comes from the word wise. Haha. Yeah, early 15th century, philosopher sage, from Middle English wise, W-Y-S. And then they added ard on the end of that, which is apparently would compare to Lithuanian zeneste, which is basically magic or sorcery. So it's a wise sorcerer, wise person. So yeah, there you go. So wizard. There you go. I'm a wizard. So take that for what it's worth. Yeah, with the Abrahamic religions, the interesting thing about it, like I don't criticize Christians, because I think a lot of the Christians I've met, besides for extremists, I think extremists in anything tend to get wonky. But in Christianity, they do genuinely want to be good to people. They want to have a moral compass. They want to treat others well. They want to live a good life. That's commendable. When they try to convert you, as long as it's not really forceful, they're doing it out of love and compassion. How can you fault someone for caring? Like, come on. Now, my grandma, my dad's mom, before she passed away, she was very, very Catholic. I never really opened up with my spiritual beliefs with her, and I did towards the end of her life. And she smiled, looked at me, and she said the only thing that's important to her was to have faith in something. from a Catholic. That meant a lot, hearing that from my own grandma, and that will stick with me. She always accepted her grandchildren for who they were. She as long as you were a good person, she wanted you just to find something and be happy. That was the most important thing to her. And I thought, yeah, that stood out to me. And I've met Christians who would give you the shirt off their back, but I don't buy into their religion. I don't. I could say the same thing of a lot of pagan religions too. I don't buy into Wicca. I'm not a huge fan of Wicca because I think it's an amalgamation that claims things that are not its own. You got to find what's right for you. And mine just happens to be a constantly shifting and changing viewpoint on how spirituality works. Interestingly enough, if you look at some of the Christian beliefs, not only do they have stuff like thou shalt worship no other God before me, but does that mean there's other gods if you're not supposed to worship other ones before them? Is there an actual name to it? If you look at some of like the name Allah, which means the high one, so that's a title, so that's technically, is that the same God as a Christian God? Is Allah and God the same? Well, let's look at different names for God. What about Jehovah? Is Jehovah's God's name? Is God actually a title instead of being an actual being? And then there's also the Hebrew name Yahweh, which might be one way to pronounce it. Well, if you look and research Yahweh and where Yahweh came from, Yahweh was actually married. Yahweh had a wife. Look up Asherah. And I'm telling you, like, seriously, look this stuff up. Don't take my word for it. Yahweh had a wife, Asherah. Asherah was worshipped as well and honored, and in some cases, maybe more than him. During a certain time period, especially in Europe, men were thought of as superior. So of course you would stop worshiping a goddess. But then they couldn't completely give up their goddess because now people pray to Mary. Mary, Mother of God. Wait a minute. I thought you were only supposed to worship and pray and honor God. So why are you worshiping and honoring saints? Why are you praying to Mary? Because people look to that goddess mother figure and they're connecting with that divinity in a way that speaks to them. Mary's answering their prayers. I thought only God could. Then there's also the argument, if God is all omniscient, all powerful, and all present, then who are you to dictate how God can appear to the normal human? If a human perceives God as a particular deity or a multitude of deities, who are you to dictate what God is capable of? It contradicts itself. That's why I don't like religion, because I feel, in my opinion, religion is a sense of control. So instead, I want to look at why. What makes this path so special? Where did it come from? What did they used to do? But at the end of the day, it's all hearsay anyway. I didn't live through that. I'm only 41 years old. I've only been here for 41 years. So everything I look at, I have to trust that whoever wrote it down or etched it in a stone or carved it or made a tapestry out of it knew what they were talking about enough for me to consider it. That's why I don't like to believe in other people's religions. That's why I find my own path. Sorry, I get off of my little tantrums a lot. I like the divinity concept. Read that. I'm mostly white and a little Cherokee. I've always felt drawn to the Native American spirituality, and then later Norse and Celtic because also have Norwegian and Scottish ancestry. Right. And there's nothing stopping you from looking at all of it and finding your own unique blend that makes sense to you, in my opinion. I grew up Christian, but I could never accept that I needed saving from anything. I am a literal part of source. So what do I need saving from? I never could believe that part. That makes sense to me. I grew up Christian and walked away at 18, spent the last 10 years studying other religions. I don't fit into a single named group, but I pull from a lot of different religious beliefs. I think a lot of people that practice modern neo-Reconstruction revivalism tend to be eclectic in nature. Most of the people I talk to will reference different practices from around the world. I think that's very common because I think most of our societies that today tend to be monotheistic in nature. So people are either atheist or monotheistic typically. One of the Abrahamic religions is very popular, especially here in the United States. So when people look, they're seeking something else. When you start looking, you tend to look at a lot of different stuff because now there's so much available. That's also why I do my YouTube channel, because when you're looking, I want to advise people that there's a lot of BS to sort through. And I want to encourage people to research and question and ask for sources. That's what I want to do. If you don't want to listen to me, don't. I'm just a random idiot on the internet. Organized religion is not necessarily spirituality. People confuse the two. 100% agree with you, Sword Sister. 100%. New camera? Not a new camera, but a new phone. It's been a while. And hey, Frithborn, how you doing? I'm on both YouTube and TikTok right now, so I'm bouncing back and forth between the two chats. It's funny, Old Norse Vikings were often feared as sorcerers. See, that's the thing, like Near. I've actually been meaning to ask some of the folks in the community about this. I keep hearing modern folks just give themselves the title of Vitki, which we know translates essentially into like sorcerer, wizard, witch, whatever you want to call it. It's a wise individual who practiced magic. What do we really know historically about Vitki? Is there sources or references you can share with me? Because I can't find any. I hear the name and I can see the translation, I can see the etymology behind it, but I'm not finding any writings on what the Vitki were. It's just like the Volva. The Volva, it's like we can see stories that are secondhand about what the Volva might have done, but not how to actually practice. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. People are claiming these titles without a connection to where they came from. So it's a modern adaptation of it. So where's the connection? What are they building it off of? What are they basing their practice off of that gives justification to call themselves Vitki, Volva, or even Gothi or Gothar? Just out of curiosity, I didn't know if you had any sources, because I can't find any yet. I'm not done looking. I like your view on finding one's own path. I've looked into Abrahamic religions and other spiritualities. I guess I was looking for a label to call myself at times. It could be overwhelming. Yes, I actually, and if you want to go through some of my older videos, I actually have something, what do you call yourself? And I mention it doesn't matter. Basically, in essence, it's you are who you are regardless of what label you're called. A label is definitive and usually used for communicating with others. But since your spiritual path is more important for you as an individual, I would advise against trying to get validation from others. Sharing ideas and being inspired by others, I think, is a great thing. But you don't need to limit yourself to a label. You are you, no matter what you choose to call yourself. You are ever changing. You are unique. You're the only you that there will ever be. You do not need to have a label that someone else came up with. Now, if you really want to identify with something, I would advise taking into consideration what is the main purpose and drive of your spirituality. If you have a particular culture or spiritual path that you're looking for, okay, use that for a while it makes sense to you. If not, use something more generic. Like I said, if you get into magic, magician. Someone practices magic, no religion or spirituality necessarily involved, just a magician. If you want to be spiritual, what about priest? I mean, technically, I guess you would have to be a priest of a specific religion, and there is some wonkiness with that. But it's like literally just, plenty of words out there, and your opinion on what it is might change with time. In the lore, there are maybe 2 references to Vitki, but wise person is closest. I'll see if I can PM them to you. Absolutely. And like Near, if you have Discord, I do have a Discord server, or if you find me on YouTube, I know for a fact you can message me on YouTube for sure. But yeah, you should be able to private message me. You should be able to. But thank you. I appreciate that, like Near. I know you've been doing a lot of this stuff longer than I've been alive, I think. Haven't you? Haven't you done this for like over 30 or 40 years? Researched a lot of this stuff? So yeah, I'm all about sharing resources, both sharing what I have or getting new ones, because, it's constantly learning, right? There's a lot of BS, but there's also a lot of knowledge that open your eyes to a lot. I will share my studies with anyone who is interested, but I still encourage everyone to seek the truth on their own. Completely agree with you, Spawn. That's the big thing I try to do. 35 plus years. Okay, so I've been alive longer than you've been practicing, but you have definitely been practicing longer than me. I think might have to math. So I was about 13. Let me math. Not that it matters, but I'm curious now. So 41 minus 13. I was 28 years ago. So yeah, about 28 years for me, roughly. My mom bought for me my first spell book, which was Scott Cunningham's Earth Power. And that's what started a lot of it, because I was interested and I wanted to start looking, and I was around 13 or so, roughly. And that I still have that book, actually. I still have it. Earth Power by Scott Cunningham, right there next to Earth, Air, Fire, and Water, the sequel. But yeah, it's got me thinking, why believe what people tell me to believe? Why can't I figure it out for myself? What made these original spiritual folks so special that they could tap into divinity and come up with whatever's out there and I can't? What's my Discord? I will PM it to you. Although there's not a lot of people here on the live, is there? Actually, if I've been doing this for... Yeah, my phone's actually heating up. I'm actually going to stop the live on TikTok for now. I will continue a little bit longer here on YouTube because my phone is starting to heat up pretty good, but I will PM you my my name. So thanks for hanging out, everyone, here on TikTok. YouTube will continue for a little bit longer, and we'll go from there. So I will ping you here in a few, like near. Bye for now. All right. So that is the end of my TikTok live. And I'm going to... Oof.
Mom, no.
Let's see. Inbox. I think I can message like this. And then... Like Near's right there. And let me message him my Discord name. I think that's down here. By the way, I think I have it in my community tab if any of you want to join my Discord. You don't have to. I've got mostly a gaming section, which is where most of the interactions come from, but I also have a section for spirituality for like chats and stuff. But again, whatever you want to do. Seriously now, where's my stuff? Profile. My account. Streamer mode enabled. Okay, that does not tell me what my username is. This is very bizarre. I'll have to find that, I guess, in a second here. Sorry, bear with me as I try to figure this out. Could have sworn there was a way to like just click on your profile and it's supposed to tell you what your username is. It keeps saying streamer mode enable. It should be right here in my user profile. Yeah, I'll have to do this in a second here. I'll deal with it in a second. After my live. Maybe my live is keeping me from being able to do it. Let's see, what else do we have in chat here? I tend to call myself a druidic sorceress since that pretty much summarizes my practice. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. Like I said, just find what works for you and calls to you. I have a question. Do you think the books on magic are genuinely stuck in a state which I could only call an information loop? Yes. 100% agree with that, Sword Sister. I feel like a lot of people repeat the same stuff, and I'm trying to trace it back to where it might have originally been written down. Now, I have some of it, but not all of it. I can find most of the stuff I'm finding. A lot of the New Age spiritual books tend to repeat things from the late 1800s. That seems to be what everyone repeats, and a lot of it seems to come outside from different traditions. I mean, I can talk for hours on different spiritual practices that might have potentially come from somewhere, but I can't tell you where a lot of it came from. And that's what I'm on a quest right now to try to do, is discover where some of the stuff might have actually come from. You have stuff like casting circles, and that casting a circle is actually an orb. It's a bubble. So when you're casting your circle, whether you're pointing with your fingers, your athame, or your wand, whether you're picturing blue flames coming out of your hand, or however you're drawing and tracing that circle, that's the surface that it touches on the earth, but there's above and below. So there's an orb above the earth and below the earth, and it creates a bubble in a container. Can't tell you where that practice comes from, though. Or if you're going to use different type of spell work, why do you using candles and herbs? And are they to enhance or add to it? Does it matter which crystals or stones you use? Do you need any of that stuff at all? If you're working with magic, are you working with the elements? Which elements are you working with? Are the elemental set? Where does that come from? Does it come from Hinduism? Does it come from Chinese traditions or Japanese traditions? There's different elements associated with different traditions. And then you can trace some of the stuff back, like I've got a Grimoire Shadows, and somebody pointed out to me, and I mentioned this in my last live, it's literally from this other guy's Hermetic Order stuff. So the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, that actually mixes into a lot of the Jewish mysticism like the Kabbalah, as well as some of the other practices from Hinduism. So they already have this mix of different practices and spiritualities. So how do you separate that out from what they're trying to make it. So in many cases, I feel like they have copied and pasted and then just renamed it. And a lot of the spiritual books, especially from the Llewellyn age, I find as I read them, I'm reading the same thing. And that's why I'm like, okay, so where did this come from? And what makes that original person so special? And if we're all just playing the telephone game, which is what it feels like, let's stop playing the telephone game and try to find out what the original message was. And then make up your own mind. That's what I'm trying to do. The last few years, books on the craft have been improving, in my opinion. Do you have examples of particular books that you're very fond of that have been more recent? I personally haven't noticed it, but I haven't bought in a lot of the newer books. I've been focusing more on historical stuff. For example, book A refers to book B, and then B refers back to book C as resource. It seems like no new information is given. Yes, completely agree with you, 100%. I'm not Wiccan, but I kind of like it. I like the Wheel of the Year, but what do you think of the theology side of Wicca? Are the deities equal, or is the goddess greater than the god? Excellent question. So it depends on which version of Wicca you're going with. There is British traditional Wicca. There is Gardanian Wicca. There's Alexandrian Wicca. There's Dianic Wicca. And depending on which tradition you go with, they actually come from different cultures. So British traditional Wicca will have more of a British traditional standpoint of it. But if you look at Dianic Wicca, that's actually technically Streghiera from Italy. It's actually Italian. Diana is a Roman goddess. And you can find books that will tell you different ways of practicing. I actually have a spell book over here, which is in Italian. And it's translated to English. And some of the spells in here I would never, ever, ever, ever even consider practicing. And it's like, okay, so where did this originally come from? But they claim themselves to be witches. So it's like, is it Wiccan or is it witchcraft? Because a lot of Wiccans consider themselves witches, but most witches do not consider themselves Wiccan. So there's that little iffy in between part. Not to mention the Wheel of the Year isn't Wiccan. That's one of the complaints I was having about Wicca. They claim a lot of stuff that's not their own stuff. The Wheel of the Year actually comes from Celtic practices. So that's more, in my opinion, Druidic than it is Wiccan, because you can literally look at the old Celtic calendars and find some of the holidays. And then they butcher and change the holidays. Like take, for example, Samhain. Samhain. That's an Irish word. You know what Samhain means? It literally means November. It is the name for the month of November. And it's traditionally it's practiced on November 1st because it's literally the month of November. And everyone's like, but isn't Samhain Halloween? No. You know what Halloween is? Ihahauna. You know what Ihahauna is? It's Irish for the eve of Samhain. So it's like they take things, but they take parts of it and they confuse it with other stuff. But a lot of the names that they're using are actual Irish words. You can actually, or Gaelish words. But you can look it up. It's actually from a completely different region. So in Wicca, answering your question as far as god or goddess in Wicca, typically Wicca believes in a horned god, some sort of antlered male being, and then they have a triple goddess. Depending on the tradition, Dianic Wicca, as far as I understand it, is more focused on female, so the goddess is considered higher. But other traditions, it's like what you personally associate with. I believe that they're supposed to be equal, but it depends on the Wiccan you ask. And then it also depends on which god they're basing them on. The horned god can literally be the Wiccan horned god, or maybe they're talking about Herne or Cernunnos. The triple goddess, are you talking about Diana? Are you talking about Brigid? Or are you talking about a different triple goddess? So again, there's this borrowing from other traditions, and then it causes confusion. Wicca is an amalgamation practice, and like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. It just, one of the things that frustrated me with Wicca was the first thing that I was introduced to, spiritually speaking, that was outside of Christianity, that was actually religion oriented. And I spent about a year studying it and writing things down, and I'm just like, wow, this is awesome. And then I learned more, and I'm like, wait a minute, how is this Wiccan? Wiccan tarot, Wiccan runes, Wiccan calendar, Wiccan this, Wiccan that. And it's like, is this all from Wicca? And then I found out later that it's not from Wicca, it's from other stuff, and it's a modern amalgamation. It's an eclectic path. In my opinion, source is pre-gender. but you can think of source as either God or goddess or something else, whatever you feel connected to, right? I think gender is a biological thing. So feminine, masculine forces are part of everything. And that goes back to what I'm talking about with divinity. Most beings in nature have a male and a female. It is gendered. The occasional is not gendered. So with that in mind, I mean, hell, even in Christian mythology, they say that we're created in God's image in Christian mythology. Okay, well, there's men and women. So is God a male or God a female? Or God both? Makes you wonder. So consorting with spirits, the green arte, the crooked path. Aiden Watcher's books are great. Not familiar with Aiden Watcher. I'll have to check those out. Oh, those are the 3 books that you think are great modern books? Okay, I'll check them out. Blood and Bones. Nope, Blood and Mistletoe is one I have. Not familiar with that one either. Just some books I enjoy. Well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that list. I'll have to write those down. Actually, I'll write them down right now before I forget. I'm always looking for new books to read and consider. So I'm going to add a new section here to my notes. And I'm going to say... for Lizbeth from stream, books to read, YouTube stream, 3/11/2023. So we have Consorting with Spirits, the Green RT, the Crooked Path, Aiden Watcher's books, of Blood and Bones. Cool, thank you, appreciate that. Yeah, I'm always looking for additional things to add to my library and things to read and consider. Isn't Christianity kind of a eclectic path of Jewish Greek paganism and Zoroastrianism, wouldn't you say? I don't know if I would word it like that, but I mean, I think that kind of makes sense. I mean, it depends on which Christian path that you talk about, but yeah, a lot of them, in my opinion, are very similar. Interestingly enough, like I said, if you go back far enough, the paths had a goddess before they went down to just a god, and then some of their traditions pray to saints and Mary, where others it's God only. Some of them have different versions of the Bible. Some of them don't use the Bible at all, Book of Mormon or something instead. So like each of the paths are slightly different, and there's some modifications, but they apparently used to have spell books, and the Jews used to practice magic called Kabbalah. You can actually still look it up to this day. You have the Key of Solomon. A lot of the stuff in the Icelandic traditions, in my opinion, the Gulderstafr, it comes from the Key of Solomon. Looks very, very, very similar to a lot of the images in there, and you didn't start seeing those Icelandic symbols until the 1800s when the Key of Solomon was available in Iceland. So that makes me think it was inspired. Could be wrong, but that's my personal view and perspective on that. Matt are in books for beginners. The Psalms are a spell book that still works today. I consider prayer to be the exact same thing as a spell. If you look at Taoism, they will write these, can't remember what they're called now. Basically, it's a piece of paper, and they write a command to the gods, and it's basically a spell. And it's like a talisman, basically, is the way to translate it in English. You can look them up at Taoism and paper spells or something like that. But this is an old tradition that they used to do, and that's the type of spell. But it's a prayer, it's a command, it's an order, like you're ordering food from the deities. You're ordering something to be done, and they go and fulfill it. You can pray to a deity, you can pray to a god, and hopefully that comes through. You're asking and drawing in forces. When you do a spell, you're essentially trying to draw in forces, whether they be elemental forces of nature, or you putting your own influence, your own intent into the spell. You are drawing in or directing power or force. What's the difference between a rite, a ritual, and a spell? So a rite is basically where you're going through a ceremony, a passage.
So you might do a wedding is a type of a rite. A baptism is a type of a rite. A ritual is typically something that you do to honor something in most cases. You might ritualistically do a celebration. So, like, you might do rituals on a regular basis. Like, for example, one of the holidays, those are like rituals. So a rite is a passage through life. A ritual is honoring something or interacting with something. And a spell would be more of a type of ritual. You don't have to do spell ritualistically. So, for example, if you set up an altar and you say whatever words you want to, and you light candles, you cast a circle, perhaps, depending on your tradition, and then you release that, that is a ritualistic spell. But you could technically also cast a spell by holding your hand out or laying your hand upon someone and speaking words. You can basically, like a prayer, words alone and intent only, and that's still considered a type of spell. So if that helps, that's the way I look at them. That's my opinion. I don't have sources to back that up. That is stuff based upon what I've done study-wise that I believe to be true. So I want to be very clear on that. That's my interpretation of those 3 words. So we are up to an hour and a half, and because I keep these lives on my YouTube channel, I'm probably going to cut this here because I don't want to have a 5 or 6 hour live that people don't want to sit all the way through. So hopefully this was an enjoyable conversation. I want to thank you one and all for participating. I do have more videos coming to YouTube eventually. I have 3 more that are planned, and then we'll go from there. But I do want to try to do lives on Saturdays now, probably around the same time. Thank you for sharing. Absolutely. Thank you for hanging out. Like I said, I love talking about this stuff. This is all just my opinion. This is just about being part of the community, sharing our experiences and thoughts and interpretations on things, and then going from there. So anyway, thank you for the stream. Interesting talk as always. Absolutely, Sword Sister. Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate it. Cool. Thanks for the question and answer, man. You betcha, the Dusty Dud. And like I said, just keep in mind, and I've said this many times, this is just my opinion. And if I share the resources, make up your own mind. And if I don't share the resources, feel free to ask for them. If I don't have resources, just know this is my ramblings and thoughts. You don't have to take any of this for fact. So, even if you know that, I like to say it anyway. So, anyway, thank you. Have a great one, and may your path be a fruitful one.